All right, and we are live. I don't know if any of you guys have done a Google Hangout, but they put you through this thing where you have to click this big start broadcast button, and then you have to wait for the light to turn on. So hello, my name is Adda. I wanted to welcome you to this webinar. I'm really excited to be here with you today. It's a beautiful day here in New York. We're so happy that the winter, it looks like it's finally giving out for summer, which is wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is about the skills that you need, that you might not realize that you need if you're going to work in the sort of technology coding world. And before I begin and talk to you about this most important skill that you have to know, I just wanted to tell you that I'm really excited that you're here, and I want to congratulate you because I think the fact that you're here really speaks to the fact that you already have one of the skills, or sort of have the foundation for what makes a really good technologist, and that is that you are going out and you're looking for information and you're looking to hear from people who are in the industry, and you're trying to learn and soak everything up, and that's absolutely so important for working in the technology industry, because this industry moves so quickly and it's always changing, and it's really about learning to adapt to that change, stick with it, stay up to date, not get overwhelmed, keep learning. Those are the things that really make good technologists. So today we are going to be talking about something that I call the developer mindset. And what we're going to be talking about is not rocket science, and in fact, it's not even computer science. And but it is really, really important, and it's really important that as you sort of enter the technology industry and work in this field, that you cultivate this developer mindset and make it sort of part of who you are. And because I really do believe that this skill and this mindset and developing this is more important than any programming language that you could learn, or any software skill that you could learn, or any sort of hard skill. Because it's really about creating a way in which you work, and a way in which you learn, and a way in which you approach your work, and that is going to serve you more than any sort of specific thing that you learn, because software comes and goes, programming language come and go. These things are sort of fleeting, but kind of having an ethos of and a mentality in the way in which you approach your work is actually something that will really do a lot for your career. So, and I really believe that if you start to look at examples of people who work in technology and have had really successful careers in technology, you'll start to see that they often share these kinds of traits in common. And I really believe that developing this mindset will make you sort of perfectly poised to be really successful working on a technical team, working as a programmer on your own. And it really seems to set apart, in my experience, the sort of people who are maybe more mediocre programmers who kind of like to be a cog in the big machine, versus the people who really go out there and make big change in the world. So, in the invitation that I sent you to this webinar, I talked a little bit about my own experience. And for me, the pivotal moment in sort of this kind of idea of this mindset coming together for me came when I actually learned JavaScript. And I had learned to code a couple years earlier, and I had been working in the field, and I had been doing a lot of front-end work on development teams. And I had definitely kind of played around and diddled around with JavaScript, but I hadn't really taken the time to really, really learn it. And so what I was doing is I was kind of editing it, and I would, but I was kind of like patching things together, and I didn't really know what was going on. And I had a couple of bad experiences where I was asked to do something and I didn't know how to do it. And so I had started to develop this very fraught relationship with JavaScript, where I had grown really, really afraid of it, honestly. And I was afraid, JavaScript is a little bit confusing, especially when you're starting. And I had started to doubt my own abilities, and I started to worry that maybe I was never going to be able to do this programming thing, and I was just going to be writing HTML and CSS for the rest of eternity, and I wasn't really going to be able to kind of become like a real hardcore programmer. And I was spending all this time and energy thinking about that and worrying about that, rather than just dealing, with the situation at hand, which is that I needed to learn JavaScript. And then I was working on a project, and the developer who was supposed to be, doing a lot of the JavaScript work and the back-end work quit, and there was a deadline. And I was sort of faced in this, I was put in this situation where I was like, okay, we can either hemorrhage money and try to scramble to find somebody. And honestly, like we kind of did that also, like we sort of parallel tracked, looking for somebody to replace this developer. And then at the same time, I was like, I really just need to take this opportunity and learn what I need to learn and fix this situation. And so a lot of people like to ask me, what I did to learn JavaScript. People also love to ask me what I did to learn HTML and CSS. And I understand why people want to know that information. I think we all sort of have this general idea that if we just had the right resources or the right tools, we too could do it. And I'm happy to tell you, like I bought a lot of books and I watched videos online and I consumed a little bit of everything, but the truth of the matter is that what I really did at the end of the day was I sort of changed the way that I approached JavaScript and buckled in and really, said, all right, it's time. Like, I'm going to do this until I get it, and I'm not going to spend any time worrying about how long it takes me. I'm just going to do it until the job is done. And, of course, like I have lots of opinions about the best way to learn things and, the way I wish I had done things. But I really think that at the end of the day, like the crucial, the sort of the game changer for me was having a very specific and explicit application for what I was learning and having a clear understanding of what the goal was and being like, okay, like I'm here and the goal is here and I have to, figure out how to bridge that gap. And the way that I'm going to have to build that bridge is using JavaScript. So I better learn how to use JavaScript to build something that, will be safe and walkable from an engineering standpoint. So I keep sort of referencing this idea of a developer mindset. And I want to talk to you a little bit what I think the developer mindset is and the sort of, key components of it that I really want you to start thinking about. So the first tenet of the developer mindset, from my perspective, is what we jokingly call around here with Skillcrush, that you need to learn to love the pain. And we say this cheekily because really what it means is that I think you need to start thinking about the pain not as pain, but as something that that's like sort of, a crucial part of the learning process. But the line comes from one night I was at dinner with my dad a couple of years ago, and we were out to dinner we were at the apartment of some friends of his, and this is here in New York, and their daughter had just had her wisdom teeth taken out. And so she was at the dinner table, and she was, taking all the, like, Vicodin, like, whatever it is that they give you, and she kind of had, like, a puffy face, and she was really, really miserable because getting your wisdom teeth taken out is totally miserable. And she was kind of complaining, and she was like, I just took the Vicodin, like, should I take another one? And her mom was like, well, they were sort of debating this, like, should she take another Vicodin? Like, what should she do? And my dad, like, having drunk a couple glasses of wine, sort of looked at her, like, laughing to himself and goes, well, you could take another Vicodin, or you could just learn to enjoy the pain. And I just remember having this moment of being like, oh, okay, like, you're so ridiculous. But you're right, because the thing is that we all have these situations in life where there's nothing we can really do. Like, we are going through an experience that's painful in some capacity. And it's not to say that, like, you should enjoy pain and you should look for pain, but there are just times in life where you have to get your wisdom teeth taken out, and it sucks. But it sucks a lot less than if you didn't get them taken out and they, like, cause all kinds of long-term dental damage to your mouth. So you sort of accept short-term pain in exchange for not having, like, a really much bigger mess to deal with in the long term. And obviously you're not going to like it, but we can kind of try to the best of our ability to start to understand that pain as pain that we're choosing and pain that is going to serve us in the long term. And I think that's a really good analogy for, like, this decision that you are making as somebody who is a working professional. Maybe you've had a different type of job and it just hasn't been exactly what you wanted, or maybe you haven't found the kind of work that you want, and you're making this really active choice right now to put yourself in what is most likely and should be, honestly, like an uncomfortable position. Like, it's not easy, especially when you're older, to go and learn a new skill, especially something as weird and foreign as coding. But it's really important, and it's going to serve you for a really long time. And I mean, like, this internet thing, like, as you know, it's not going anywhere. So, you know, better that you make the choice now to start learning about it and start to understand it. And then you can really, you know, I really do believe that you will be able to reap the rewards of that decision. So this sort of goes into the second thing, that's sort of about this developer mindset. And I think this speaks to part of why learning to code and sort of learning technology skills can be so painful. And that is that with computers, sort of the good and the bad news is, you know, the good news is that when you're working on a code, it's like a piece of code or a piece of software, if it's not, well, the good news is that if it's right, it will work. And the bad news is that if it's not right, it won't work. And what that means is, like, computers are, there's no gray area. There's no, like, it kind of works or anything like that. It's like, it's a total binary, right? And there's definitely, you know, once it's working, you can make it better. But before it's working, like, it's broken. And it's, like, throwing errors at you all, you know, left, right, and, like, upside down. And you're just sitting there being like, oh, what did I do to, like, put my, like, why did I choose this horrible feeling of being told that I'm wrong constantly. But that really is life as a developer. And it's funny for me because, you know, our students are, one of sort of the number one complaints we hear from our students is that they don't know what's wrong with their code. And it always makes me laugh a little bit, and I always am happy to take a look at their code and help them out with it. But it's sort of like, well, this is life as a developer, is you don't know what's wrong with your code, and you're looking at it and you're like, it's not working, and I think I've done everything right, but unfortunately, like, you know, I like to say this to a lot of people because they'll be like, I looked through it all a million times and I can't find the error, but it's still not working. And I'm like, well, you know, the good news is that then we definitely know that there is an error, because if there wasn't an error somewhere in your code, like, it would work. Like, I promise you, like, it'll work. I mean, I could say, like, in my 6 or 7 years of working in the technology industry, there was one time where legitimately it was not my fault. There was a day that Rails broke. It was like in 2011. I was working on a client project, and I think, I forget even the specifics of it, but I remember that my client found a tweet from, you know, something on Rails that said, this thing is broken and we're working really hard to fix it. But that was it. Every other time that I've gotten an error message, which is, I don't know, 100,000 times, it's been my fault. So the only thing you can do, given that, like, this is the reality that we're working within, and it's like, you know, either accept it or I don't know, pack your bags, because this is life in the technology industry. Is you just have to find a way in which to approach that reality. And this is where I think the developer mindset, like, really comes into fruition, right? Which is that, like, I literally, when I am faced with a problem, like, for example, the other day I had a student who, you know, sent me an email and said, you know, that I'm working on this JavaScript script, it's really not working. And I looked at it and I didn't see anything wrong with it immediately. So sometimes, like, I'm like, oh, you know, you don't have a semicolon, or you are missing parentheses, or it's something very, very obvious, but sometimes it really isn't. And so I sort of said, okay, like, I looked at it and I was like, all right, this is going to be a little bit of a hard one to solve. So and it's funny, because as soon as I sort of realized that, I felt myself, like, literally, like, I sat down, I, like, sort of squared my shoulders, and, you know, like, we were joking about it earlier, that it's like you strap yourself in and you're like, all right, it's time to figure this out. And you know, and you put the code in front of you, and you go into your developer mindset, and you literally, like, you go super, super focused, and you look at it and you say, okay, like, I'm going to take this line by line, letter by letter, really, and I'm going to check all the things that need to be checked, and I'm going to do it with excruciating detail, because I know that if it's right, it will work. And it's not working, so something must be wrong somewhere. Somewhere there is a missing semicolon or a tag that isn't closed or something that isn't named correctly, and I'm gonna find it. And it's like it's like you take out your big detective spyglass or whatever they call it, and magnifying glass, and you're like, all right, this is what I'm doing now until I figure this out. And it's funny because I mean I've sseen like other developers, so, like you see them go into like they'll be like, okay, like I'm ready, like I've got my gear on, like I'm gonna take a look at this. And you sort of have this running list in your head and of things that you have to go through. So in the instance of JavaScript, you want to do things like look at do you have a semicolon at the end of every line? Did you close all your brackets and parentheses? Did you do it in the right order? Did you spell everything correctly? Really, it's easy to make these mistakes. And then the last one, and this is probably the hardest one, is does your logic make sense? Like, are you doing this in an order that makes sense? Are you passing the right arguments and parameters to the right functions? Do you have, is this all like logically flow in a way that's going to make sense and is going to run? And that's it. That's really the secret. I mean, this is what developers do all day long, every day. They sit around and check for semicolons missing and think through sort of the logic of something and how to make it work. So that it's funny because it's like this is really life in technology. But what is really amazing about this is that this kind of mindset really, it's really, really good for technology, but it actually, like as I was working on this webinar, I was like, these are coding skills, but these are life skills, right? Like this is really stuff that I think applies to pretty much anything that you want to do in terms of, learn to like being comfortable, being outside your comfort zone. Understand that it's all about sort of getting feedback. In the instance of a computer, it'll be very binary. It'll be very like, yes, it worked, no, it didn't. Unfortunately, other aspects of life can be a little bit more middling like that than that. But it's all about sort of iteration and making it better and figuring out when there's a problem, how to approach that problem in a methodical, sort of calm way. And really tackling it head on. So the last thing that's really important to think about is it's really important sort of managing your own psychology and sort of figuring out ways in which to cope with the situation, because especially when you're learning, things are really, really hard. And I think just one of the things that happens, and I think this really happens in life too, but it's like when you haven't gone through an experience, then you haven't sort of built up your cache of confidence that you can do it. And that's just something that I can't inject you with that. Like I wish, like if I could like manufacture like a syringe that like injected you with like coding confidence, like I would be all over that, and like we would be selling it with like Skillcrush like logo all on top of it, trademark, etc. But unfortunately, that's not something that I can give to you, and so it's really something that you have to build up for yourself, and you really just have to trust that if you keep with it, like you will build it up. And I can't, like, how do I like tell you how much I can guarantee that? Like if you keep at it, you will get there 100%. And it may take a week, it may take a month, it may take a year, it may take 10 years, but you will 100% get to the place where you have gone through enough experiences where you start to really feel confident. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, this is really where, like, there is no developer in the world who knows the answer to every problem that they're going to encounter. That's not the point. And that wouldn't be any fun. Like, that's boring. They would have to go do something else because they'd be like, I know the answer to all problems that I will ever encounter. Like, this isn't fun anymore. Like, part of the fun of working in the technology industry is that you encounter new problems that you have to solve. But I think that, something that you really get from sort of working on many projects and working on stuff over time is that you start to get experience working through these problems and start to get confidence that you will be able to work through the problem. That it might take a while and it might be really hard, but you will come to the other end. And I think that's sort of, it's really important that you sort of stick with it and get that experience of actually accomplishing something, because otherwise you can have this, you can start to get the sense that that it's impossible. And it's not impossible. There's lots of people doing it, and you're perfectly capable, just as they are. And it's really just about sticking with it and getting through the uncomfortable part. And it's really important that you develop ways in which to cope with the discomfort and make it through that. So there's a couple things that we like to tell our students, and these are really mantras that I really I want you to consider sort of using for yourself. And the first one is this idea of good, better, and best. Or, as we like to say, make it work, make it efficient, make it elegant. And one of the most common misconceptions that we see with beginners is that they think that they have to have this supremely beautiful, amazing code. And they really put a lot of way too much pressure on themselves to write code exactly perfectly, or just write sort of, I don't know exactly what they think that they need to do, but it's definitely quite a bit more than they need to. But what you need to do at the beginning is you just need to make it work. So really, honestly, anything you can do to make it work is awesome. That is 99% of the game, especially that stage in the game. And you have to remember that code is not a thing that you do and it's done. You do it, you get it to work, and then you start to make it work, and then you have the opportunity to make it work better. And then you can, make it really, really, really beautiful. But that's sort of you earn the right to make it really good by making it work. So the very first step that everyone has to go through is by making it work. And I mean, I still go through this every day, right? We'll have some coding thing that we want to accomplish on Skillcrush, and the first thing you do is just, can I get this to work at all? And then you get it to work, and you're like, oh, I think actually if I wrote it this way and if I structured it like this, that would actually make a lot more sense. And that's just part of the process of, it's kind of if you can imagine being, I don't know, a ceramic artist, and it's first you sort of, or a painter, for example, right? If you've ever watched anyone paint, they start by, it's a process of sort of layering, right? And say you're doing a portrait, and you start by sort of doing the outline of somebody, and then you kind of fill in all the details, and you make it better, and you build it up over time. And coding is very much the same way. And the second thing that's really important for you to keep in mind, and I really, really say this, especially to people who are just getting started, is that any time that you spend worrying about your ability is wasted energy. It serves you 0%. In fact, not only does it not serve you in the learning process, it actually will actively take away from your learning process and make it harder for you to learn. And I know it's really, really hard, and I still suffer from it. Everyone on my team still suffers from it. I think all developers suffer from it, whether they admit it or not. But to the best of your ability, you just, every time you get those moments where you're like, I don't think I can do this, I don't have what it takes, you just have to say, nope, I'm not going to go there. You can, that does not serve me in this moment. It's all about just asking questions and figuring it out. And it's also really important in this, I think that sometimes we can get into this zone where it's us and our computers, and we think that we have to be alone in the universe doing things, and it's really important that you also, build a community around yourself. Put yourself in a position where you can ask questions of people. Often just, there's sort of a joke in the tech community that it's, my friend had this thing called the rubber ducky. And it was he would have a rubber ducky, and before he would ask somebody else, he would ask the rubber ducky. And I'm not saying that you should do that, because you should feel free to ask somebody else a question. But the point was that even just the process of articulating your question is enough to actually help you figure out how to solve it. So, the point of his rubber ducky was that he would ask the rubber ducky the question, and often that alone, just the process of formulating the question, was enough to get him over the hurdle. So, and then the last important thing that I want you to think about is that it's really important to blow off steam. So, and I think that you see this in the tech community. One of the things that makes working in technology so fun is that there is such a sense of, and a culture of play, and sort of, there's GIFs, and people love to write these bots that will do funny things, and there's, if you Google on, or if you go look at Skillcrush and read about Easter eggs, that's sort of like hidden little code things that are funny. In general, like there's just a really big kind of commitment to play and fun and release. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that coding can be really hard and it can be really stressful and there can be a lot of angst in the process. And so I think part of the way in which technologists have sort of developed ways in which to sort of, create like a little bit of a release valve for that is that they really take very seriously, doing silly, funny things with code, or, having funny emoticons, or, like on Google Hangouts, they have those like hilarious little things. Like I think that it's important that you approach all of this. So both from like an ideation standpoint and from a working standpoint and from a way that you interact with your teammates standpoint, like with a sense of play, and sort of remember that like at the end of the day, like unless you're working on a financial services app or something like that, like if it doesn't work or if something breaks or nobody, hopefully no children or small animals will be harmed in the process, and just don't take it too seriously. It's just in general, like make sure that you take some time to share a joke with your friend over chat, or just do something silly in the middle of when you are sort of ripping your hair out with your coding challenge. So before I take questions, I just want to review really quickly this whole sort of idea of the developer mindset that we've been talking about, and just remember that first, like you have to you got to learn to love the pain. And by that I mean you have to really learn to like enjoy the process of learning and figuring things out. It's really important to think about things as, good, better, best. Like you first have to get it to work, then you can make it better. Any time you spend doubting your abilities is wasted energy, and it is actually, that is energy you're taking away from your ability to create and move forward. Fun and play are so important, so make sure to make them a priority. Always be reaching out for help, and giving help, both the process of asking for help and also sharing what you know with other people will just come back to you in so many ways and will be so helpful in your learning process. And at the end of the day, like when it comes to coding, if it's wrong, it's not going to work, and sometimes you just got to buckle in and go line by line by line and check for every possible error you could be making. And it's like you got to think about yourself like a detective who's there to root out the problem. So lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about how we sort of think about cultivating this developer mindset in the Skillcrush blueprints. We really are of the belief that obviously we are here to teach you skills, but the most important skill that we can help teach you and sort of guide you in developing is the developer mindset. So it's really, it's really important in our classes. Like we do a little bit of throwing you into the deep end of the pool, and the thought is that, we want you to sort of go there and work hard and, struggle with the coding challenges. We don't want to give you the answer, but we do want to provide you with the support and sort of stress relief of having people who can help answer your questions, having a community you can reach out to. I try to make some jokes. Whether or not you'll think they're funny, that's on you to decide. But it's, we really do believe it's important not to be spoon-feeding our students, and we want to teach you how to tackle the problems on your own, because that is the skill and the muscle that you most need to develop. And that's the one that's really going to serve you in every aspect of your life, but especially in technology. So I really want, if you're thinking about sort of making a career change, if you're thinking about wanting to get into technology, I just want to invite you to come and be a part of our community, to join our next blueprint. It starts on Monday. It's really, really fun. It's a fantastic group of people, and we love to, do hard things, but do them together, and therefore have a lot of fun doing them. So I wanted to open it up to questions. So you can actually post a question right below there should be a Facebook chat thing right below. So yeah, sweet. So I'm gonna take a look, and so I see a question here from Angela, and she is asking, so hi Adda, my name is Angela, and I'm one of the Mother Coders from San Francisco. And if you guys don't know what Mother Coders is, go check it out. It's a really, really awesome program run by a woman named Tina in San Francisco. So she okay, so she says, I went with a Blueprint web developer course and started a new web design and development firm with my husband, A Vivid Visual. Any advice on starting a tech-based startup? Oh my gosh. Whew. That's a big topic, and I would love to talk to you all about it. So, yeah, I mean, there are so many things. I think I'm having this moment of being like, where do I begin? So I think, so first of all, let me just say that I think starting a web design and web development firm is an awesome first step for getting into the tech industry. That is like what I did, and I did it at a point where I had been building websites for clients for maybe about a year and a half, and I'd worked on some bigger projects with some friends of mine. And what was fantastic about it was that you just get so much experience. And at that stage in the game especially, that it was just, I mean, it was so valuable for me, right? Because I got to build these projects for all kinds of different clients and who had different business needs and goals. And you get to sort of think about all these different hard questions of like, well, you know, what are their needs? Like these people want more people to view their YouTube channel. This group over here needs, I'm trying to remember all the things that we had. We did a lot of work for media companies. But yeah, so anyway, so basically in terms of like a way to start getting a lot of experience, it's just, there could not be a better way. And there is so much need for it. And one of the things that you see in the technology industry is that you have these like really, really big design and development companies that are serving sort of, you know, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and then you don't really have, and then there's all these small businesses who don't have, you know, a couple $100,000 to spend on website design, but maybe do have $10,000 or $5,000, and there's a real need in the marketplace for people to serve those people. So I think it's really awesome that you're starting a company. In terms of advice, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, one of the biggest things that I learned was how much of running a business like that is about client management. So it's really important that you develop a really clear and structured way that you handle clients, both, you know, from everything from the first point of contact to the proposal phase to setting them up as a client to working at the scope of their project to keeping them on schedule. And these are things that, you know, you are going to have to learn them as you go and make a lot of mistakes, and that'll be some of the best learnings that you do. Don't fight with clients over email. I would not recommend that. It never goes well. I really believe, I would say like one of my biggest lessons outside of like a million things I learned about, you know, legal structures of companies and contracts and billables and paying employees. I mean, there's like so many details, but the biggest thing I learned was the importance of managing client relationships and, you know, figuring out, yeah, how to sort of interpersonally deal with a client. How do you deal with a client who's really upset and hates everything you just delivered to them, doesn't think it matches anything that you promised? How do you cope with that? How do you make sure to get clear expectations from your client? Like, how do you get them to communicate with you about what it is they want? So these are all, but anyway, so basically my secrets are like, you know, I think the phone is a really underutilized piece of equipment in our day and age, so I encourage you to think about that. Okay, so the other question we have here is from Jessica. So Jessica has a question about logic problems, it looks like. Oh, well, she's just saying that she loves noodling through logic problems and it doesn't seem so daunting, and that's fantastic, Jessica. It's all about logic, right? Like, I love to joke with Emily, my lead developer, that development is like really one big if-else statement, which is basically you're just saying, is this true? No. Okay, then do this. Well, is this true? No. Well, then do this. That's pretty much what it is. Sometimes it feels like that's all we do. So Sherry has a great question here, which is she was wondering what are some great ways to network. Um, so this is another thing I feel like that we have the technology industry or like sort of developers to thank for that there's been a lot of they've created a lot of tools for you to help you figure out ways to network. So the first one is just meetup groups. Meetup groups are really, really great. I mean, there are, and technologists love meetup groups. Like there's like a gazillion. They also, sometimes people refer to them as user groups. And I actually need to ask somebody why they're called user groups, but they'll have like the Ruby user group or the PHP user group. So I just encourage you, like, to a certain extent, when you're starting, like, you just need to go and kind of like soak it all in and go to those meetup groups. Don't worry about not knowing what they're talking about. Just sit and listen. I mean, like I said, like developers and technologists in general are really, really good about hosting events and organizing things. And I just encourage you to sort of dip your toe in the water, start going out, start meeting people. I think that it's like, I think, and this really is another sort of thing that happens in all aspects of life, but like, you can't ever kind of expect to do one thing and get a huge, you can't expect to go to one meetup group and make a contact that you're going to get a job from. But I think that if you go to one meetup group a week, over time, like, you're going to start to develop relationships with the people, and that will naturally lead to projects and opportunities that you can't really anticipate at this moment in time. So I hope that helps. But yeah, just keep on keeping on. So Kim Young is asking, can you take your blueprints at your own pace, and is there a deadline to finish? So that's a great question, Kim, and the answer is absolutely. When you buy a blueprint, you get lifetime access to the content, so there is no rush. You can take your time, and we also invite our students to come back. And so if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to join a later blueprint group, you could absolutely do that and sort of go with them. We do provide a pace, and the thinking behind that is not that we want to force you into that, but just that having some sort of schedule and accountability can be really, really helpful, especially when you're learning online. And maybe, like, if you don't, I think, if you think about, like, when you go to a class, like, yeah, it's really great to go to the class, but part of what that does is it forces you to have time in your schedule and sort of make time for that class. So I think we're trying to help you and sort of cultivate that same attitude towards it, but you can absolutely take your time and do it at the pace that makes sense for you. So and then Kim also asks, do you offer guides, templates for how to scope a project for a client? So you definitely learn a lot about scoping projects in the process of scoping your own projects. At this point, that is not something we cover in the Skillcrush blueprints, but we do master classes where we talk to people who are working in the industry, and as always, like, we're available for video chats and to answer your questions online, and we're happy to talk about stuff that's outside the curriculum. So we'd be more than happy to give you guidance on that. Okay. So I have a question here from Jillian that says, do you know when you're going to launch more courses? Any WordPress courses, and when is the next opening after this one? I love this. It's so funny. Like, we were laughing, our team, earlier about how, like, there's, like, we get these sort of, like, groundswells where all of a sudden, like, everyone's asking us about a WordPress class. So yes, we absolutely have a WordPress class in the pipeline. I can't tell you right now when it's going to launch. Hopefully soon. As a small company, like, we have to sort of do one thing at a time, but it's absolutely in the pipeline. And the plan for the next blueprint will be sometime in sort of midsummer. So look out for, that's sort of our tentative date right now, but things are always changing. So if you're thinking about doing the blueprint, I would encourage you to sign up now. And just to speak to what I was saying with Kim earlier, if you need to take some time off and come back to it, it's always going to be there for you. So there's no risk in signing up now, and you can always join a subsequent blueprint if that ends up making more sense for you. Okay, so Julie has a great question, which is, when you're teaching yourself, at what point can you consider yourself a professional for job applying purposes? Also, I was wondering if you have an email where I can send messages. And yeah. And know that I'll get them, absolutely. So first of all, you can always email me personally. It's Adda, A@skillcrush.com. I encourage you to email hello@skillcrush.com, which I will also receive, but it'll also, Kelly, who is our amazing instructor and just all-around fantastic lady, will also get them, and that'll really help to make sure that sometimes I get a little overwhelmed with emails, so I can be a little bit slow to respond. So I encourage you to at least CC hello@Skillcrush, because then Kelly will be on the case and make sure that I respond in a timely manner. So when can you consider yourself a professional? This is one of those, like I'm going to give you this horrible answer that you're not going to like, which is like, you're a professional when someone's paying you to do it. So, you know, it all depends on who the client is and the situation, right? So, like, for example, you could offer to make your mom a website and you could charge her $500 for it or $200 or something nominal, and it can be very simple, and that makes you a professional. In terms of, you know, it's all about sort of thinking, like, you really have to think about what it is that you want. Do you want to work at a tech company? Like, do you want to work at a Google or a LinkedIn or a Twitter? Do you want to work maybe for, let's say, like a newspaper and work on their website? Do you want to work at a design and development agency and work as a web designer or a front-end developer? Do you want to start your own startup? Do you want to, you know, maybe you want to do web management for a nonprofit? So each one of those companies or applications of your skill set is going to require a different set of skills and a different amount of knowledge. So it's really hard to say. I mean, that said, I will give you some pointers, which is that you have to know HTML and CSS. It's sort of just like very, very base level stuff. You need to know a programming language. So ideally you would know both JavaScript and a backend programming language like PHP or Ruby or Python. And it doesn't mean you need to know them really well, but you need to understand how they work. You have to know Git. That is absolute requirement for anyone who's going to work on it. I mean, really, in any sort of professional context, you should be using Git, and that Git is a form of version control that basically saves your code and makes sure that in the event of a disaster, your code won't disappear. And this is really important if you're working. I think really in any situation where someone's paying you, you should be using Git because you want to sort of give them that insurance policy. And actually, and this is part of the reason why we have now integrated Git into our web developer blueprint, because I just see time and again that, like, that is something that is an absolutely required skill in terms of working on teams, on development teams. And then, you know, the other thing that is really important to learn is understanding how to work on a team and work in the workflow of working on a big software application. So when you're starting and you're learning HTML and CSS, you're sort of learning the process of going from nothing to having a simple website up. But that is not normally how you would actually apply those skills in the industry. The way that you would do it is you'd go and get hired by a company, and maybe as a junior or front-end developer, and they would be like, okay, we have this huge Rails app. You have to install the Rails app on your computer, and then you have to edit the HTML and CSS of the Rails app. And it doesn't mean you need to know Rails or need to understand Ruby, even though obviously having some knowledge of it is unbelievably helpful. But you need to know how to navigate, you know, the folder and file structure of a huge web application. And that sounds a lot more intimidating than it is. It isn't actually that hard or not something you couldn't pick up very easily, but it's really important that you have some sort of understanding of how you would build and use your HTML skills in context in these environments. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see if there's more questions. So Nicole is asking, how frequently do you start a new round of blueprints? And so just to go back, we tend to start them every 2 months, but things are always changing. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about doing a blueprint, to sign up for this one and, you know, do what you can. And if you know, you have to drop out for one of the classes, enroll in a later one later, or sort of re-enroll. So what's the typical time frame? Nicole also asked, what's the typical time frame from one of your courses to a full-time paid position or similar via freelancing? So it's a really great question. It's hard for us to say kind of like average. We've had students who've taken our classes, and we've had students who in the class got jobs. We've had students who a month later got a job. It really depends on each person in the situation, but I think if you're really motivated and you're looking for a job, I think that you can get one relatively quickly, and we'd be happy to help you in terms of looking for work, figuring out what you're qualified for, interview tips, like all of that is stuff that we absolutely talk about in the program and want to help our students with. Are there any more questions? I think that's it. Okay, I have one last question, and this one is from Tuan Lee in Houston, Texas. I just want to give a shout out to Texas because we love Texas, and we've got a lot of Texans who take our classes. And I just realized that I have to load more. Okay, it looks like those are all answers, so that's good. So Tuan Lee's question is, do you think in order to be a successful web developer, you need to know a bit about web design? If so, should we learn web design first? This is a great question, and the answer is yes. Like, I do think that more and more what you're seeing in the web industry is, and I think this actually probably goes across different industries, but you're seeing more and more sort of this idea of the separation between design and technology, or design and construction, or whatever it is starting to collapse, and you're seeing, that people, both designers need to know how to code and developers need to understand design. And I think this makes a lot of sense, because the truth is that what you realize as you work on software applications is that this distinction is one we've created. Like, it really doesn't exist. And a lot of the decisions you make on the coding side are going to impact the design. And I mean, for sure, the design decisions you make are going to impact the coding. And I think it's really, it becomes increasingly important that both sides can speak to each other and understand sort of the constraints of code, the constraints of design. And I think in terms of building really, really fantastic products, it's really important to understand that. The most important thing, I think, for any web developer, more than sort of traditional design, like, traditional design I would characterize as typography and colors and visual hierarchy and things like that. And I do believe that everyone should know those things, but the absolute most important thing is for developers to understand user experience and understand sort of the principles of user experience and how to do user testing and how to do wireframes and how to test wireframes and how to sort of make sure that what they're coding is really easy to understand and work with from a user standpoint. And I have to say, like, one of the best things about learning to code for me has been that it gives you sort of insight into how things work, and that means that I can sort of get around a lot of user experience problems. So I'll be like, I click this button and I don't get where I want to go, but I know how to get there on my own because I know how sort of software applications are structured and I can guess at things. The problem is that the vast majority of the users of your software are not going to be able to do that. So it's really important that you are able to create a software application that makes sense to people who don't understand how it was created. And I think that often when you are the developer coding something, that's the hardest. It's just impossible for you, or it becomes very difficult for you to get yourself into that mindset because you know it so well. And it's really important to sort of know the techniques and the structure and how to go about sort of analyzing your work from that standpoint. So we have another question here from Jess, and she says, if I'm doing amazing freelance work but run into a problem with my code that I just can't find, do I just need to ask my network, or are there such people as professional code checkers? So this is a great question. So one thing I didn't talk about is that one of the things that sort of like makes me laugh because, I'm always trying to tell my students, everyone struggles with code and runs into problems. And as a example of it, there are entire companies, million-dollar companies that are built in order to solve this problem. So the best thing to do usually in these instances, I don't know off the top of my head if there are professional code checkers. I think that chances are you could probably hire somebody through like one of the Odesk or Elance or TopTal or something like that, maybe for a really short-term project to look at your code. That's always an option. And that's also something you could do with your friends. So if you feel like you're asking your friends too many questions, especially if you're working on a freelance project, it might be worth it for you to, ask your friend to pair a program with you, or maybe pay them to help you out for an hour or two. But the other thing you can do is that you can post on websites like Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow, is basically built for this exact reason. It's a place where people come and they ask questions when they're struggling with something in code, and then the crowd, sort of the user base, answers them. So I think that is a great option. You want to be careful. Stack Overflow has very specific rules about the way in which you ask the question. So make sure that you follow those conventions. Otherwise, they're strict and will do things like delete your question. So, I would look into that option. I think that is a good first place for you to start. And then, of course, asking your friends is, if you have a friend who will answer your questions, that's like worth more than gold. So I have a question here from Jessica that says, what do you think about trying to learn more than one backend language at once or to begin with? So I actually, I guess I wouldn't say, backend versus front end, let me put it this way. I think that learning multiple programming languages is a great idea. I think that sometimes if you're really, really just beginning, you maybe give it a couple of weeks between when you learn one and then try to learn another. But I actually think that learning at least two in close succession can actually be really, really productive, because often you just need to hear something, put it a different way, or maybe, I know for myself, I had learned a little bit of Ruby, and then I learned JavaScript really well, and then I went back to Ruby, and it really clicked for me in a way that it hadn't clicked before. And I think that was because I had learned a lot through my process of learning JavaScript, and then with Ruby I was able to say, oh, this is like that concept in JavaScript, but it's a little bit different. And I am starting to understand the nuances, and that helps me better understand the concept, and it also helps me appreciate how the languages are different and why I would want to use one versus another. So I think that it's a great idea, in short. And it's actually the way we structure the blueprint. So we actually have you learn JavaScript first, and then you learn Ruby. And I think it's a really, really productive way in which to learn both languages. And I think that sort of the experience of doing it in two different languages can really, really help. I'm not liking this Facebook thing because I have to refresh in order to see if you guys have asked questions. Let me see. So Jess has another question, which is, are there any jobs out there that are 100% remote virtual? And the answer is 100% yes. In fact, I hire people. Most of the Skillcrush team is 100% remote and virtual. Granted, if possible, I like to meet them. So when we have an opportunity, either, to meet up in some place, it's really good to do that. But yeah, absolutely. And there's great agencies that specialize. There's actually a company called Power to Fly that is a startup that we really, really love and have been doing some work with. And they do exactly that. They place developers who are 100% virtual or remote and get them work in all kinds of interesting companies. And I think that's one of the best things. This is, if we want to have sort of a greater discussion about why working in this industry is so fantastic, I think that's one of the best reasons to work in technology, is that you can absolutely work from anywhere and do great work. And some of the best companies have huge remote work audiences. Microsoft is a great example. Basecamp, which formerly called 37 Signals, they wrote a whole book about it. It's called Remote. It's all about doing remote teams. I think there's a lot of there's a very strong culture of remote work in technology, and it's one of the best parts of the industry. And then Cheryl Valentine has a really great question. It's my favorite question so far. Can you please keep doing these webinars? Yes, absolutely. So I think that is legitimately the last question. Oh, wait, no, I see one from Angela. It says, hey, Adda, Angela again, any advice on building a clientele when you're a new startup? Yes, again, one of my favorite topics, marketing. Yeah, so I mean, the most important thing when you're trying to build any sort of user base is that you really need to be clear on who it is you want to be in your user base. And this is like the hardest thing, because when you're starting, you're kind of like, I just want anybody, like anyone who will pay me money to do things. Like, I'm poor and I'm starting my company and I need money. And to a certain extent, you do have to do that. I mean, so like if, say you want to only serve, I don't know, if you want to build websites for theater artists, let's say, but there's like a restaurant down the street who needs a website, then you should totally do that. But I do think that, this best thing for you to do is say, what kind of projects do I want? So do I want to serve, where do I think I can provide the most value? And for me personally, like when we started our business, we did a lot of work for lots of different companies. This is the business I should preface that I ran before I ran Skillcrush. But we served a lot of different clients. But we were people who had worked in media before that. So I had worked at an online magazine, and I'd done a lot of freelance writing, and then I had worked at MTV. So I had a lot of experience working on websites for large media companies and thinking a lot about sort of interactive news experiences, data journalism, that kind of stuff. And that was really both like where my interest and experience lay at the time. So so that was kind of the niche that we carved out for ourselves. Like we sort of thought about like, what are the media companies? How can we serve them? What can we do? And then, it wasn't like a clean, clear, easy path. And now I know a lot more than I knew then. So I feel like if I were to do this again, I would approach it a little bit differently. But then it became about sort of like cultivating the connections that we had in that industry, and meeting people and sort of proposing things to them and seeing if there was ways to work together. And the good news about that is that if you have sort of a niche that you're interested in most instances, sort of the members of that niche tend to know each other. So what happened with us, for example, was that we got this job with a local radio station who was trying to build up their online presence. And they were a lot focused on news, so it was sort of a perfect fit for us. They both didn't really have a lot in sort of they had a website and a web team, but they didn't have a lot of sort of interactive news built up. So they didn't really have a team that was kind of thinking about like, okay, we've got a news story. How do we translate that onto the web? And how do we do that in a dynamic and interesting way? And we had a lot of experience with data. So that was, and they, I think they didn't have a huge budget. So like they, working with a scrappy startup it was just a good fit in a lot of different ways. And so we started working with them, and it was really fun. And we started really small projects, and I'm sure we only got paid like, I don't know, not very much money to start off with, but it built. And then what was great is that, our client at that radio station knew everybody in the media industry. So then anytime anybody else was looking for somebody to help them with this, he would pass our information along. And that was how I ended up working for like what felt like every newsroom in New York City. So for you, it's just all about thinking, okay, like who is the client that I'd be most excited about, that I feel like I'd be able to give the most to, and how do I reach them, and then how do I create opportunities for them to share the work that I'm doing and to tell their friends about me. And I think that you'll find that you'll sort of naturally start to grow an audience in that way. But yeah, so it's a lot about you have to put up your shingle, and then you have to try to be as specific as possible. And it's really easy to be afraid to be specific out of fear that you're going to alienate people who don't fall into that demographic. But in my experience, it doesn't, the people who don't fall into that demographic will still want your services. And then the great news is that the people who do fall into that demographic will recognize you as somebody who's there to help them. So on that note, I just, again, I want to encourage you all, if you're thinking about diving into this tech thing, if you have, been worried that you can't hack it as a coder, I just want to really encourage you to take that first step. It's totally scary, but we're here to support you every step of the way. We're going to try to make it as fun as possible. I think if you ask our past students, we do a reasonably good job of making it fun. Classes start on Monday. You have until the end of day Monday to enroll, and then it's closed. Enrollment closes, and it's not going to open for a couple months. And I just really want to encourage you to, take that step. Do it. There's so much opportunity to be had. There's so many jobs. There's so many different ways to apply your skills and so many different functions. And I really do believe that I think your coding skills will be really useful to you, and you'll find that there's a lot of ways to apply them. But I also believe that this sort of idea of the developer mindset will serve you extremely well in anything you approach or have to tackle after this and after learning it. So with that, I would just want to wish you a happy Friday afternoon. Have a wonderful weekend, and it's been a pleasure. And if you have any questions about the blueprint or what blueprint to pick, or what job to do, or how to get a job, or clients, or any of that good stuff, we're always here to answer your questions. You can drop us a line at hello@skillcrush.com. I do get every single one of those emails, and I do read them, and I will respond as quickly as I can. And if but the good news is if you email hello@Skillcrush, Kelly will be there to make sure I answer. So on that note, take care and have a good one.